For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jace. I am one of the team members here at Renaissance. I'm normally the guy that's in the back making food during this. But you get the privilege of hearing from me this time. I think Drew intentionally chose soup and salads when I was speaking because he knows that I hate soup with a passion. And so he knew I wouldn't make anything for you anyway, so he thought. So if we don't have enough food today, it's because I didn't get you any soup. It's a running joke that I hate soup, and I'll just say this: I like to eat my dinner, not drink it. But I will leave my soup sermon for another day. So today is the last message. We're going through a series right now that we're calling a creative minority. We've been working through this the past few months. This is the last one. So for those of you who haven't been here or need a reminder like me, we've been talking about what this looks like through the lens of Daniel. We've been looking at the story of Daniel, his exile to Babylon was our example. And so the definition that we've been using for a creative minority should be on the screen there. I'm going to read it for us again. A creative minority is a Christian community in a web of stubbornly loyal relationships knotted together in a living network of persons who are committed to practicing the way of Jesus together for the renewal of the world. So, just to give you a little recap of where we've been so far, Drew kicked us off way back, I believe in August, what it looked like to engage culture in a healthy way, and this idea of living as a creative minority. Robert talked to us about a compelling alternative story or narrative. Johanna shared about being a community that worships in a way that invites others to worship him too. Eamon shared about ethics and Daniel's humility and how he didn't spend energy criticizing or controlling others, but he led by quiet example. Then Christine shared about, in January, practices of a creative minority and how true practices of faith are not performances, but encounters of love. And then Fab talked to us last month about how if we want to bring renewal to the world, we must give lordship to Jesus and follow his commands. So that's where we've been. Today, you get me, and today we're talking about participation, exerting redemptive influence. So also from John Tyson, he says, a creative minority makes a contribution to the world in which it lives, influencing culture through redemptive participation. So in other words, how do we integrate our faith into our everyday lives? How do we live with the tension that we believe the gospel is good news that can bring healing to the world and wanting to share that with the world, while at the same time not wanting to be misunderstood, labeled as hateful or bigoted or closed-minded, or fill in the blank with whatever else after that? How do we not get caught up in the culture wars going around us, or retreat from them altogether, and instead engage with love? So that's the question that we're going to be asking. We want to bring redemptive influence to the world, but just how do we go about doing that? So what I want to focus on first is the word influence. So according to Merriam-Webster, influence means to affect or alter by indirect or intangible means. So what I want us all to do is take a minute, read that again, indirect or intangible means. Think about someone that was influential in your life. Who were they? How did they influence you? Did they know that they were influencing you? Do you even know them? Have you ever met them? Take a couple minutes. I want you to take a couple minutes before I get going. There's a question on the screen, but I want you to turn to someone near you that you did not ride here with, someone that you did not come in a car with here, okay? So talk to someone. Try and keep it to just pairs of two. If it needs to be three, it can be three, but no more than that, okay? So 30 seconds to a minute, and just talk about someone that was influential in your life and why you found them to be influential. Ready? Go. All right. So I was really focused a lot on this phrase, exerting redemptive influence. And so I was trying to think of an example to share with you all. Getting too close to this one. I feel fortunate because there's lots of people and situations that come to my mind when I think about exerting redemptive influence. And I just want to share one with you. So I grew up Catholic. I grew up going to Catholic church all through until 8th grade. After 8th grade, I got confirmed and stopped going to church like most of my friends. And so I entered high school. This is just a little backdrop to the story. I entered high school probably neutral towards God. I wasn't like actively following Jesus, but I wasn't like anti or anything. I just kind of was. It just, church was just there, and it wasn't a big part of my life. So I entered high school, and I remember there was this guy named Daryl. He was a substitute teacher, so I would see him around a lot. He also volunteered with the basketball team, the freshman basketball team, and the freshman football team. And so, can you all hear from
Yeah.
Okay. Is this good? Maybe I should stop swaying a little bit.
Stop breathing.
Yeah. So there was this guy named Daryl, and I'm just gonna. Can I use this one? This one? You try. Hello? Okay. That's mine. All right. So there's this guy. I would see him around. He helped coach freshman football. He helped coach freshman basketball. So I played football, and I would just see him around. He wasn't a coach. I remember him. I don't remember anything in particular about him. There wasn't really anything special about him. I just remember him being there all the time. He would kind of get balls or keep kids in line, make sure we got from point A to point B. And so he was, I would say, kind of like a glorified manager as an adult, right? He was just there. But I just remember him being a consistent presence. He was always there, always, showing up. And, would give encouragement from time to time after the coach yelled at you, like, good job, next play, you'll get it, stuff like that. Continued to see him around freshman year, substitute teacher and all that. And it wasn't until the end of my freshman year that I found out that this guy named Daryl was the pastor of a local small church. And so I didn't think much of it, to be honest. I just kept seeing him around. He was always encouraging, always gentle, always someone that I enjoyed being around. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy that was interested in getting to know us. So my sophomore years, I find out from some friends that he's going to lead a group for high school students where you can come and ask questions about God and your faith. And so I said, no, thank you, that's not really for me. And so I had no interest in going, but I just kept seeing him around. He was always around at the school. He was at sporting events. He was just present at the school. So finally, junior year of high school comes. My friends have been continually inviting me to this thing over and over again for a year. And ultimately, I ended up going because I had seen Daryl around enough and knew who he was and trusted him enough that I was willing to give it a shot. And I could tell a similar story, almost identical to, I had a couple of Young Life Leaders, which is like a youth outreach organization, that did the same thing, even coached freshman football with Daryl. I could tell the same story about a couple other people in my life. And so Daryl and those Young Life Leaders influenced the culture of the school, influenced the culture of that freshman football team. They infused joy and encouragement in a listening ear. They brought their faith with them to school, into football practice. And that brought redemptive influence. I wouldn't have said that at the time, but that's what it was. Some like me ended up getting involved in high school. I found Jesus the whole bit from being involved in those groups. Multiple friends of mine have reached out to Daryl and those Young Life Leaders throughout life to deal with crises that have happened in their life. Some even ended up going to Daryl's church and finding Jesus much later in life. That all stemmed from getting to know him as the freshman football guy that helped out with the football team. And some just remember him as a pastor that liked sports and was always around. And that's the extent of it. But everyone was influenced in some way that was a part of that team and that was at the school. It wasn't just about getting us to come to their thing. It's about participation. It's about being faithful to what God is calling us in the world. I had the privilege of becoming friends with Daryl and those Young Life Leaders as I grew up, and they would tell you the same exact thing that I told you, that they were just being faithful to what God was calling them to do. And participating with him, and through that, were able to exert redemptive influence and trust God with the results. So for this whole creative minority series, we've been looking at Daniel as our guide, and I think he was the epitome of this in a lot of ways. So I want to take a look at his example as well. So I'm going to summarize, and I'm just going to pick out a few key verses that I think demonstrate this that we've heard. We've heard the full stories of this in the previous months, but I'm going to give you a 5-minute version real quick through Daniel. Ready? Okay, here we go. Jerusalem was sieged. Daniel was taken to enter the king's service. Almost immediately, he refuses to defile himself. But because of his obedience, along with his friends, we'll call them Shad, me, and Abe, God gave them knowledge and understanding of all kinds, okay, including the ability to understand visions and dreams, so much so that the king found Daniel and his friends to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Then in chapter 2, the king has this dream. None of the astrologers can interpret it. He gets mad and decides, I'm going to kill all the smart people in the kingdom, because that makes sense. Daniel says, no, let me go talk to him, buy some time. That night, gets a vision from God, goes back to the king the next day. He says to the king, no one can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Before he even starts, he makes sure that King Neb knows that it's because of the God that he serves. He goes on to explain the dream, and the king responds afterwards with, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. This encounter ends with the king praising God, and he's so impressed with Daniel that he makes him ruler over all Babylon, and also ruler of all the wise men, gives him lots of gifts. And then it says, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shad, Meshach, and Abednego administrators in Babylon. Daniel asked for and received a request that his friends be put in positions of leadership. He exerted redemptive influence. Are you catching all the ways that Daniel's doing this? If not, don't worry, because I'm going to recap at the end too. Then in chapter 4, King Neb has another dream, calls Daniel back in to interpret it. He says to Daniel, I know the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. So he tells him his dream, but this time Daniel gets a little scared. It says Daniel was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. He goes on to tell King Neb the dream, and even though he was terrified, he ends by giving his advice to the king, renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. After he fulfills his duty to interpret, he uses that leverage and that influence to give advice to the king. Turns out King Neb doesn't heed the advice. The dream is fulfilled. King Neb goes off into the wilderness, and so we get a new king, his son, Belshazzar. He's having a big party, lots of wine, the golden goblets, the whole deal, and all of a sudden this random hand starts writing on the wall out of nowhere in the vision. So again, just like his father Neb, he brings in all the astrologers. Hey, tell me what this hand writing on the wall means. Then the queen tells him, I just imagine, the queen sitting next to like, hey, Belshazzar, there's this man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. It says he was found to have insight, intelligence, wisdom, keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and could solve difficult problems. Talk about quite the reputation Daniel's built up. So Daniel, of course, interprets the dream, basically tells Belshazzar his days are numbered. And Belshazzar is so impressed, even though it was about his own demise, that he promotes Daniel to third highest in the entire kingdom. But he died that night. We get a new king. We get King Darius. Then by the time we get to chapter 6, it's Daniel had so distinguished himself by his exceptional qualities that the king had planned to set him over the entire kingdom. So naturally, the other administrators got jealous. They tried to find grounds for charges against him so that they could knock him off the top spot, right? But it says that they couldn't find anything wrong about his conduct of government affairs. They could find no corruption in him. And remember, Daniel is older at this point. He's been there for, Christine mentioned this one a couple months ago. He's been there for a couple decades at this point. Quite a few promotions along the way, and still they couldn't find any corruption in him. It says he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. And their conclusion, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. They knew that the only way that they were going to get to Daniel, or any blemish against him, was about the God that he served. So, the rest of the story. They put a new law out about praying only to the king, which, of course, Daniel ignores because Daniel's Daniel. He's not going to do that. And he continues to be faithful. So they throw him in the lion's den where God eventually saves him. But the king, before he goes into the den, says, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Again, quite the reputation that he's built up. People know who Daniel is. The chapter 6 ends with King Darius issuing a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. So the story of Daniel, the accounts that are recorded, and probably even more so the ones that aren't recorded, are full of Daniel living a life of participation and redemptive influence. So you can see, recapping up there, some of the things that are said about Daniel throughout the course of these 6 chapters. 10 times better than all the magicians. Surely your God is the God of gods. The spirit of the holy gods is in him. Keen mind and knowledge, understanding, insight, intelligence, wisdom like that of the gods. Trustworthy, not corrupt, not negligent. Serves his God continually. So there's a lot I could talk about in relation to exerting redemptive influence. You all discussed earlier all kinds of ways that people have influenced you, who's influenced you in your life. But I want to focus on just 2 ideas, 2 phrases really, that I think will allow us to live a life of participation and exerting redemptive influence. And both are present in the story of Daniel as well as in my story. So the first phrase is a phrase that kept coming back to me over and over again. I didn't even know who said it. I had to look it up, the history of this. But it just kept coming when I was trying to think of what to share with you all today. And that is a long obedience in the same direction. It was originally a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, and yeah, I had to Google how to say that. Friedrich Nietzsche, which Eugene Peterson used as an inspiration for a book by that same title, is the idea that there isn't a shortcut to the Christian life. The epilogue starts with Eugene sharing one of his main convictions in life is that the gospel needs to be lived out in relationship with others. In the epilogue of the book, when he's talking about that conviction that the gospel needs to be lived out in relationship with others, he says this: "I realized that this was going to take some time. I settled in for the long haul. That's when the phrase from Nietzsche, a long obedience in the same direction, embedded itself in my imagination and eventually became this book." I agree with Peterson. I think that faithfulness to God looks like a long obedience in the same direction. If we want to exert redemptive influence, it's going to take a long obedience in the same direction. God uses small acts of obedience to bring about his kingdom. That's the story of Daniel. It's really about small acts of obedience over a really long period of time. Daniel prayed at the same time every day. He refused to worship any other gods. He refused to defile himself. He was trustworthy, not corrupt. He did what was asked. He lived a life that earned the respect of all those around him. It was the small acts of obedience over and over and over again. It was the cumulative effect of those small acts of obedience that led people to say the things about Daniel that they said throughout his life. It was after seeing Daniel live his life every day that caused them to say those things. We just get the stories about the big events or the big moments in those times. But there are a plethora of small events that had to happen to make those big events possible. People would not be saying those things about Daniel if it was just one time, this 1 year. This was how he was living his life on a consistent basis. Also, as some of you know, I went on to work for Young Life. I mentioned Young Life earlier. I went on to work for Young Life for 7 years after I graduated college. And there was a comparable phrase that we said all the time in Young Life that I think goes hand in hand with what Peterson was writing about. And I think it's important as well to have redemptive influence. So this is the second phrase. And it's something that we always said is earning the right to be heard. It was coined by the founder of Young Life, Jim Rayburn. It was one of our core tenets that we talked about all the time as we were living on mission and trying to reach high school and middle school students. The idea is really just as it sounds. To be heard or to have influence takes time and must be earned. It doesn't happen overnight. It's becoming a friend. It's becoming someone that can be trusted. It's living incarnationally among a group of people to build trust and credibility so that when the time comes to speak up, people actually want to listen to us. And sometimes it's not even always speaking words out loud verbally. Sometimes it's our life that is the message. But even that still has to be earned over time, just like Daniel. Anyone can do a good deed or love like Jesus once, but it's the consistency over time that earns the right for our lives to be heard. Can you do it for a week, for a month, for a year, for a decade? It's really just a long obedience in the same direction. That's exactly what Daryl and those young life leaders did with me when I was in high school. They showed up on my turf, at my school, at my football practice, and joined me in life in the spaces that I was already inhabiting. They earned the right to be heard not from speaking on a stage or up in front of a bunch of people, but by doing life shoulder to shoulder with me and becoming a friendly voice. By being a consistent presence over a long period of time. The same is true for Daniel. He had wisdom and respect and lived life among the Babylonians and built such a good reputation from a long obedience in the same direction that he had earned the right to be heard. He found a way to participate in the culture and gain credibility, all while maintaining his connection to God. And because of that, he was able to exert redemptive influence on those around him and ultimately the entire kingdom. When he interpreted the dream, he made sure it was known that it was God who did it. He called for the king to renounce his sins. He asked for his friends to be put into positions of leadership. He himself was given a position of leadership. All these things had ripple effects and allowed Daniel to exert redemptive influence over the entire kingdom. Through his leadership, his friends' leadership, the king's leadership. It didn't happen overnight. There wasn't a shortcut. It required a consistent presence over a period of time. It required the long obedience in the same direction. And that is what will be required of us if we wish to exert redemptive influence as well. So I have two questions for you to consider. I'm just going to read them slowly, and I just want you to we're not going to share with anyone else right now. You can do that later. But just think about these questions as I read them. So the first question, I want you to think about this one. What does a long obedience in the same direction look like for you in your context and with what God has called you to do? Where do you need to have a consistent presence? What are the small acts of obedience that you can commit to? In what sphere of life is God asking you to participate with Him to be a redemptive influence? The second question, are you living in such a way that you are earning the right to be heard by those around you? How would those around you at work or at school or the gym describe you? What would it look like for you to live incarnationally in your context? Who have you earned the right to be heard with? And are you using that trust and credibility to have influence? Redemptive influence. Redemptive participation means that we do not hate the world. We are not protesting it. We are participating in it with a vision of the way of Jesus. Jesus says in Matthew 5 that we are the salt of the earth and light of the world. That we should let our light shine before others and that they would see our good deeds and glorify the Father in heaven. That's redemptive influence. But in order to do that, it must come from love. Love must be our motivation. One of my favorite verses, probably my life verse, if that's still a thing, is 1 Thessalonians 2 that Victoria read right before I came up here. I love for so many reasons, but specifically verse 8. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. It's out of love that they shared their gospel and shared their lives. After they earned the right to be heard, it says that they worked day and night not to be a burden while they preached the gospel. Meaning it was ongoing. While they were working shoulder to shoulder. It's as if part of the gospel that they were sharing was their lives. They were righteous and blameless. That's small acts of obedience. You might even say a long obedience in the same direction. And then at the end, they were encouraging, comforting, urging them to live lives worthy of God. That's redemptive influence. So I want to end with one last thought as we wrap up our Creative Minority series. It's something that I heard last week when we were in Florida, and I still just can't shake it, so I thought I'd share it with you today. Revelation 2:2-4 says, I know your deeds, your hard work, and your perseverance. I know that you cannot tolerate wicked people, that you have tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and have found them false. You have persevered and have endured hardships for my name, and have not grown weary. Yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first. If you're anything like me, sometimes our desire to influence the world, or our neighborhood, or our workplace, or our own household can consume us. We can get caught up in working hard for God, that he becomes known to others, that he ends up becoming unknown to us. So as we try to live as a creative minority in the world, let us all not forsake our first love, the one who died for us so that we could be with him.